The research and national defense facilities of the Oak Ridge Reservation are vital parts of our nation's scientific community. To continue to meet these needs, parts of the reservation require cleanup from the impacts of years of energy research. The Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board is the voice of the community, providing input to the U.S. Department of Energy on its environmental cleanup of the reservation. To learn more about this important work, you're invited to attend meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October meeting of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. Our next meeting will be November 14th. December, because of the holidays and all, we decided at the executive meeting it would probably be a good idea to go ahead and cancel that, so there will not be a December meeting. As you go to your various committees, you all may or may not want to consider not having committee meetings too. Please use the microphones when you're addressing the committee here, and use your name tags as we usually do to signify that you want to be recognized. During the presentation, question and answers, board members will come first, and then there'll be an opportunity for the public to use the microphone. I think at this time we ask the deputy designated federal officer to address us.
Okay. Excuse me, that's me tonight. Melissa and I met with Mark yesterday, got him all prepared for this meeting. He promptly fell ill around lunchtime today, and asked me to send his condolences for not being able to be here tonight. He will be here at the first possible opportunity. He really is sick, unfortunately. I just had a couple things that he asked me to speak to. Since we last met, Congress has passed something called a continuing resolution, which is in effect a stopgap budget to keep the federal government running for 6 months. That's not the ideal way of funding the government. It basically involves giving the agencies funding for 6 months, but not the full year, so it creates some uncertainty in project planning space. We're doing our best to adjust to that. The all-in number for the cleanup program is actually a little bit higher than what the president asked for. So you'd think that would be good news, but as it turns out, because of something called control points, allocations specific to sites, Oak Ridge takes a little bit of a hit during the first 6 months. We are basically being held to our FY12 budget levels for the first 6 months. That's less than what we had planned on, and as a consequence there will be some impacts on our programs. We are analyzing that and replanning the work now. Nominally, we expect that our work, particularly at the K25 and 27 site, will be delayed to the total project delays in the range of 6 months. Big picture numbers were about 20 million shy. We're getting about 100 million. We're getting at this funding level for the year, we'll be a little bit short of that. We still don't know what our funding will be for the second 6 months of the year. So come January, we'll get two new numbers that help stabilize our planning capabilities. One will be the number that we'll have for running the program for the second 6 months of the year. The second number will be the President's FY14 budget submittal. So we're going to be working with the state and EPA to renegotiate some of our milestones. We're going to have to adjust some of the projects, but we still expect to have a pretty productive year. The impacts are expected to be limited to the East Tennessee Technology Park programs, activities at the lab, i.e. the uranium-233 program and the transuranic waste disposition program have not been impacted. The hit comes in something called the D&D fund, and that's where we're going to see a little bit of slowdown. I also just wanted to mention that, and Dave, you may want to make some comments too. I attended the National Site-Specific Advisory Board Chairs meeting, last week, and it was, I've been doing this now for several years, and that was one of the more impressive meetings I've been to, actually. I've never seen quite so many recommendations of substance come out of a group. One of the biggest things they talked about this year was the possibility of expanding the WIP site's role in the cleanup program, which is an interesting idea. It's a controversial idea. I'm sure the people of New Mexico will want to have some input on that, but the board chairs signed out recommendations that suggested that DOE look at a test project to basically work through the mechanics of adding to the types of waste that could be sent to those geologic salt mine disposal facilities. They're thinking in particular about some of the defense wastes that come out of Savannah River. Right now, the site is limited to receiving simply transuranic waste, and that could be a first step in some significant changes in waste disposition options for the sites. I'm sorry. Aside from that, again, sorry that Mark couldn't be here tonight. I know he was looking forward to it. You'll get to hear from him soon. We had been planning on Sue and Mark alternating between meetings, with Mark tonight and Sue at the next one. Since Mark was unable to make it tonight, we'll probably consider swapping that out so Mark comes to the next one, but we'll leave that to Mark and Sue to work out. That's all I had to mention tonight.
Okay, thank you. Our liaisons, John, you want to start off?
Thank you, sir. I do have one announcement. Spencer, do you have the website? The Department of Energy Oversight Office has posted its 2012 annual status report on our website, and hopefully there'll be if not one shown, I'm sure Spencer will share it with all members. This particular website has all of our reports for previous years, as well as our environmental monitoring plans. So I would encourage you to take a look at it if you have an interest. The report covers, in summary fashion, all of our environmental monitoring results, as well as an assessment of DOE's environmental management, environmental control programs. So would encourage you to give it a look. But other than that, I have no announcements. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to attempt to answer them.
Spencer, could you shoot us an email tomorrow with that on it there? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones.
Thank you. I don't have any specific announcements to make, but I'll be more than happy to attempt to answer questions if asked.
Okay, with no questions, then we'll move on to the public comment period. Do we have any people signed up for comments today?
There are none signed up, but are there any members of the public who would like to comment? I guess not. And as a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for our presentation now. The presentation is on land use manager process. David, would you introduce our speaker tonight?
Gladly, Mr. Chairman. The presenter this evening will be Jason Darby. Jason Darby is a project manager on the Environmental Management Y12 project team. He has worked for DOE for 17 years on the formerly utilized Sites Remedial Action Program and the Oak Ridge Environmental Management Program. He also worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Geological Survey. He is currently responsible for mercury reduction work at Y12, future disposal facility planning, environmental monitoring at Y12 and ORNL, and issuance of the annual remediation effectiveness report, that's the RER report, and the CERCLA 5-year review.
We're here tonight to talk about the land use manager, and I'm going to give an introduction, and I have a couple other folks here with me that are going to speak to our stewardship program and to the land use manager itself. The land use manager is an automation tool that tracks land use controls and engineering controls. So it's allowing us to do something we've been doing for a while now, better, more efficiently, and with less opportunity for errors. So to kick it off, I'm going to talk about long-term stewardship, and it seems a little odd for me to be here talking to the board about long-term stewardship because the board has been involved in long-term stewardship for a long time. In fact, much longer than some of the people here that are paid to work in the stewardship field, including myself. Going all the way back to the end-use working group, the original stewardship working group, the stewardship committee, the stewardship reports from the mid-90s. The board has been working on stewardship and with DOE on stewardship for a long time. But I realize there's some new members, so we'll kind of start with the basics here about what stewardship is. And then I'm going to hand off the microphone to Lynn Sims, and she's going to talk about why we need the land use manager today, where our program's gotten to, the size of it, the complexity of it, the number of controls that we're out there tracking and implementing, and why we need a tool like the land use manager. Okay, so long-term stewardship. As I said, a lot of people in this room are familiar with this, but just to cover the basics, protects human health and the environment from physical hazards, residual contamination, and waste remaining following remediation. So a good example of this is Melton Valley. Some of you are familiar with the burial grounds and the hydraulic isolation project that we did there a while back, where we capped in place and took other measures to isolate waste. Well, that material is there, and there would be some risk if people get exposed to it. So we have controls in place to prevent that from happening. It prevents receptors from encountering residual hazard, generally through land use controls. So things like fences, signs, gates, prevent these encounters from happening. It also prevents residual hazard from migrating to receptors, generally through engineering controls. And this is where the caps prevent that material from migrating from the burial grounds into the groundwater, into the streams, and off-site. It's the longest phase of the environmental management program, so believe it or not, with all the characterization and decision-making and implementation we've been doing for decades, that's nothing compared to how long stewardship is going to go on for some of these remedies.
Jason, would you mind taking questions during your presentation? Would that be all right?
That'd be fine. You know, we've got 3 speakers, and we're going to kind of progressively get down into details. So maybe that some of these questions get answered as we go.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
I'd be willing to entertain them as we go as well. Different elements of stewardship. We have stewards, the entities that implement stewardship. DOE is a primary one, but there's also state and local government, the interagency working group that works on dredge permits out in the reservoir. A lot of information management occurs. Our environmental monitoring program collects a lot of data, and we have a lot of data and information to manage. Research is a part of stewardship, looking at better ways of doing stewardship, looking at better ways of conducting these remedial actions so we have less stewardship, we have less long-term risk. Public participation, the comments we get, the input we get on our reports, the annual remediation effectiveness report and the CERCLA 5-year review is important to us, and we get a lot of that feedback through the SSAB and especially the Stewardship Committee. And then public education, making sure the public is aware of these hazards and of these controls, and this meeting tonight is an example of that, continuing to get the word out about the stewardship program. But what we're really talking about tonight is operations, the nuts and bolts of getting it done, of making sure these controls are out there and effective and they're being tracked, and we know that, we can report on that. So we have land use controls, engineering controls, and environmental media monitoring. And these activities are required to ensure the integrity of the remedies. The engineering controls are things like caps and groundwater treatment systems, again, things that prevent the contamination from migrating to receptors. 2 types of land use controls, administrative and physical. Administrative controls are deed restrictions, zoning notices, excavation penetration permits, and groundwater use controls. Physical controls are things like fences, gates, and signs. And again, these prevent receptors from coming in contact, getting exposed to the risk. And then, of course, media monitoring. We do a lot of that, multimedia, surface water, groundwater, sediment, biological samples. Just some pictures of these activities. The picture on the left, we've got a barrel ground and a cap. So we do inspections, we do mowing, maintenance of the cap to maintain the integrity. To the right here, we're calling this in this slide a groundwater treatment facility. This is actually the collection component of it. This is a core lake collection system out of the lab that collects contaminated groundwater and sends it to the lab central treatment facility. So that requires, obviously maintenance to continue to run and inspections to make sure it's performing adequately. Land use controls, the top left slide, we've got a gate, lock, signs, the physical controls. The bottom left slide, we have a portal out at the lab, restricting access to the lab and to the barrel grounds and places where there is some risk. Out on the reservoirs, we have the fish consumption advisories, another control. And then again, our media monitoring, surface water, groundwater, biological sediment. Some of it very close to the source areas, the barrel grounds, that slide on the upper left, and other sample locations further downstream. So long-term stewardship operations start with the remedies that specify the controls. Those have to be maintained, and surveillance and maintenance and operations and maintenance are the primary ways we do that. That has to be tracked. We have as frequent as weekly inspections and as long as annual verifications of these controls. All this stuff is rolled up into the annual remediation effectiveness report, the RER, and the CERCLA 5-year review as well. So the land use manager we've got there on the end is going to help us accomplish this. We're getting it done now, but it's getting to be pretty complex. There are a lot of remedial actions we're following up on, a lot of controls that go along with those actions. And so the land use manager is going to assist us in doing that, automate how we do it. So at this point, I'll turn the microphone over to Lynn Sims. Lynn is with RSI, and before that she was with Bechtel Jacobs. She's been doing this work, environmental monitoring and stewardship for better than 10 years here on the reservation. And she's going to talk about why we need the land use manager at this time.
The Water Resources Program is generally known for our media monitoring. And we produce the RER every single year, and as part of that RER there's usually a big section and it shows the graphics and it shows the metrics, and you read about how we're attaining the remediation levels or how we're not attaining the remediation levels. And at the very end of the sections there's usually a little thing that says, and the stewardship controls were verified. And that's it. And that's because usually they are working and they were verified. But what you don't see is everything that goes beyond that checking of those controls. And it's quite extensive. We were on a 5-year review site visit, and after the site visit, it became real apparent to me that some of the stakeholders didn't really know all the work that we were putting into verifying these controls. The history of the controls across the reservation are important to keep in mind because it lets you know why we actually had to automate the system. We started back in 1991 with the White Oak Creek sediment retention structure with an action to go out there to make sure that the structure was being maintained and kept free of water that would go through it. It was followed up shortly thereafter in the mid-90s, 1990s, by the Reservoir Records of Decision, where we had more controls, the advisories in the reservoir, followed by the implementation of signs, followed by going further on up Lower East Fork Poplar Creek, where there was a groundwater use control. There is so the check on the Dean Stallings Ford parking lot to make sure that the asphalt was still there. As more controls are coming on, in 1996, the first RER gave a status of these controls. Again, the paragraph that says the controls were working. However, by the time 2001 the 2001 5-year review came upon, it was pretty much identified at that point in time that we needed to standardize the process. We needed to have standard checks on these controls, and we needed to have a centralized records retention. So at that point in time, the Water Resources Program developed some check sheets. And these check sheets were sent out to the people that were doing these controls, and we said, fill these check sheets out and get them back to us. More controls started coming on. You know where the story is going. More controls started coming on in 2007. The large isolation project that Jason referred to earlier came on. Sign checks, there's sign checks, gate checks, access checks, engineering controls, a lot of cap inspections, more and more controls. 2011, last year, we had over 200 of these check sheets that we were checking. These were coming in on sometimes monthly, sometimes twice a year, sometimes annually on all the units that we had. They were coming in from the treatment systems. It was getting harder and harder for us to keep up with these. We met with the SSAB, the Stewardship Committee, ran through, this is what we're doing, these are the checks that we're doing. A recommendation was made to automate the process. We looked into a tool that the Navy uses for their brat closure sites, part of the Department of Defense, that they were already using, and it was already working. So what we did is we borrowed that tool, we made it site-specific for us, and that's what we are starting to use today. Last year, we were in the process of uploading into the system all the information that we have, and we're just starting some of the site inspections this month using the system. The inspections themselves for the physical controls and the engineering controls actually involve going out to 9 different organizations and have them filling out these check sheets at different frequencies. Then what was happening is we were getting the checks back. We were looking at the checks and saying, okay, is everything okay? Is a fence down? Does something need to be repaired? If something did need to be repaired, we would get back to the operator of the check and we would say, when are you going to fix this? And so started a dialogue between the water quality program and whoever the owner was. Now, with Land Use Manager, this is automated. After they go and they fill out the check sheet, it's uploaded into the program. We can see there's something going on here. The program itself assigns a number where it is actually tallied to be corrected or fixed. Supervisor sees it, he signs it, and so goes with the actual fix of whatever the issue or problem is out there. It's a documented record that something is being fixed. And through us and through the spreadsheet, they know it might be a CERCLA required action. And so there's emphasis to get that control fixed. In addition to those controls, we also have administrative controls. These controls are typically verified by us doing the check sheets. We have the check sheets coming to us. And they are things like checking at the County of Register of Deeds office that there are restrictions there. We work with the ORO Realty office to assure that some of the Union Valley lease agreements are in place. So the land use manager, we have put into the system over 50 CERCLA sites. It has site descriptions, it has contaminants of concern, it has the land use controls, it has the owners are identified, it actually tallies up the inspection and it sends a notice to the individual that's responsible for doing the inspection, and you get an email notice that says you are responsible for doing this inspection, here's the inspection sheet. There's also a delinquency into it, which I don't know if they're going to like that much, where we can basically see if they're not doing the inspection also and call them up and say, what's going on over there, change in personnel, whatever, but this inspection needs to be done. It tracks the deficiencies in the corrective actions. So again, we can see is it promptly being followed up on or not. Queries in GIS, the system has a query function, so you can query and you can see where are my controls for physical controls, where are my cap controls, where are my signs controls. The nice thing also about the system is that we would get calls before and it would say, I want to move this sign. Well, we would have to dig back through the documentation, say, well, what is the purpose of this sign? Is there a requirement the sign has to say something? And now it's instantaneous. We can go right into the system and reply to the user and say what is required to be on that sign and if it can be moved, how far it can be moved, etc. And again, it's based on a proven Navy system, so that not only cut down on our cost, but it already was utilized. The bugs were picked out of it. When we actually start the documentation of a stewardship activity from a decision document that has been approved, we go to the operator who would be doing that check. We tell them, look, you have a new control online. We have to develop a check sheet for you. And you basically are going to be going into the system, getting these emails, so we work with them. One of the things that's important that we have started doing is we let them know why they are doing it. It sounds pretty obvious, but unless they know why they are doing it, unless they understand that they are doing it for a reason, for a protection of human health and the environment, they don't know that there is a push to get that control fixed. So again, it's an education. And then we load it into the system, and again, it covers the engineering controls and the institutional controls. So it literally rolls up all these 200 spreadsheets into the land use manager. It's queryable, and there's a GIS element also to it. The GIS element is when you're in the field, you're doing the field inspections, the inspector can actually, he has a little map of the area, and he can see the fence that he's supposed to inspect. He can see the locations. He can go back to the last inspection, and he can see what was wrong out there or what wasn't wrong or any notes that were included in there. So it's a real powerful tool. So again, I think I've gone over a lot of these advantages. Provides a centralized data storage, easily accessible in the field, accountable record, ensures nothing is missed. The land use manager itself has two different accessibilities. There's one that's a public accessibility, and there's one that's password protected, and that is for the inspectors that are in the field, so that nobody obviously can go in there and tamper with any of the records. The public accessibility looks like this. When you go into the manager, you see a map of the ORR. Then you can click on that map, and you would actually go to the watershed, and there's a listing of the drivers, the contaminants of concern, and there's a listing of the controls. There's also a hot link to the RER so you can see how those performed. This one here is for the Bethel Valley Record of Decision. If you would want to go to what we call a single action project, one that was not tied to a big watershed rod, you could click on that, and likely you would get something like this up again so you could see what the drivers are and what the stewardship controls were. There's a subcomponent of the system, as I sort of referred to when they go into the field, and that is for a lot of the physical controls and the cap inspections. For that component of the program, they utilize a little laptop in the field. And Dave Watson's going to talk about this component of it. He has been doing media monitoring and stewardship for over 13 years. He is one of the people who is physically in the field in charge of doing the controls and doing the checks, and they're just starting to use these little devices, and so he can tell you about how it has aided and helped them. Thank you. Oh, and this is an illustration of some of the check sheets that we were gathering in the past. So you can see they're quite simple, and they're meant to be simple. They're not meant to be a burden to those in the field. But again, it was just tallying these up, making sure they were completed on time and followed up on.
Okay, so Lynn and Jason asked me to come and speak about the field implementation of Land Use Manager, which we are currently using, just started using, and then also Datativity. These are both run by Magera system, and Datativity is something that is just in the planning phase right now. We'll have to get approval and cooperation from EPA and TDEC and other regulators, but it's more for the monitoring portion of what we do. And so for field services for the WRP, we have 8 to 10 teams go out. We sample groundwater wells, surface water sites, soil, sediment, everything that they need. Lynn, Dick, Cattell, program managers need to track contaminants concern, to trend, to write their end of the year reports and whatever else they do up there in the majestic halls they reside. I don't know, but so what we use in the field are the Panasonic Tough Books, and Lynn told my supervisor Mark Sletman to go out and find her some laptops that would work in the field. That the technology is just now getting there to where we found something that worked well. We had been with other groups before in the past that had used laptops or tried to use laptops in the field, and one of the biggest problems they had was that screen visibility. Some would black it out, just become unreadable. You couldn't enter your data, and what was happening was they were basically going back to paper. It just wasn't working for them. So these things are incredible on the screen. They do a great job, have no issues. As you can see, they withstand 6-foot drops and spills and dust and grime, and I'm sure his field teams will put all that to the test. And we got approved by security on the ORR and Y12 security, and they're password protected. And there's enough for each team lead to have one, so they can kind of set it up as they need it. Of course, it's all uniformed in the forms we use, but they can kind of set it up as they could pull this information they need and put it on a desktop or whatever to make it easy. Okay, as far as Land Use Manager, for inspections, it provides an inspection form for each site, and I'm just going to quickly go to the next slide. This is actually a screenshot of what the inspector sees, and it's kind of hard to see up here. But what they did was we had Liz Burton and Mirtha Martin and a couple of other RSI employees. They got with Magera, and what they did was they really recreated what we see on our sheets, on our old paper sheets. And it really helped us. We didn't have to dig into some crazy program to find out what we needed to inspect. It was right there for us, just like we used to do. And it's simple click of the buttons of compliant or deficient and whatever. So it made it real easy for the inspectors that are doing the job now. It also prompts inspector schedules. And Lynn may have talked a little bit about this, but there's basically a screen where you have your watershed you have to inspect, let's say Bear Creek Valley. And it shows you all the sites you need to inspect on that watershed. The next part of that screen shows you what's due. So the inspectors can look at that and know exactly what's due. Before, when we had the paper copies, we had to create that book. So we had to copy a bunch of sheets, put them in the book. We had one book. As an inspector, if you went out in the field, you did what you did, brought it back. Now, with the laptops, every team has one. So if I go out in the field that morning and do 4 inspections, and they're all showing that that's due, I've done those 4 inspections. A groundwater sampler who is also an inspector, he finishes as well an hour before lunch. He says, I got time to do a couple inspections. What's Watson done? Yeah, normal, about 3 inspections for the day. So I can go ahead and grab a couple inspections because it's real time. It shows right then that we've inspected those sites. So it's a big advantage. It sends automatic emails to facility managers and status site maintenance request. The site maintenance request, or basically all the paper form, or the form we use when we find an issue. You can kind of see on this next slide, this is what we used to have to deal with on the site maintenance request process. Basically, it was a lot of steps, a lot of emails to the different people, and it could be, once I identified an issue in the field, it could be 2 to 3 days, even a week or two before it finally really got to the facility manager and got approved for the work to be started. Now with this system, I identify the issue in the field. Right there in the field, I write up what the issue is, and basically all it is the create button, and it creates it. It automatically emails that issue to the facility manager. Like Lynn said, it number stamps it. It can be tracked. So right then, I mean, literally, if he's in his office, it could be 5 seconds. He knows there's an issue in the field and can get it to the people to get the work done. So that was a major deal in improvement. Okay, for datativity is the system we want to use for our monitoring. It kind of steps away from what we've been talking about as land use manager. It's more for our field monitoring. Like I said, it will require coordination with the EPA. What we do for field monitoring is we go out in the field, like I said, 8 to 10 teams. We have logbooks, we have field forms, well purging forms, flow forms, 10 or 20 different forms we use. We have field chain of custodies, we have labels, we have all this paperwork. So this system will create all those forms for us. It'll all be there. I think Mark said in a year's worth of time we create 35,000 sheets of paper that all have to be filed, kept for several years, and that's not counting the copies we send to other customers. All that. That's just what we create. So this will all now be electronic. And one of the cool things about it is you can load. We sampled some of these wells for years. And you can load the historical data from these wells. So if you're out on a well, and let's say you have a parameter that's kind of high, before you may not even realize it's high, or low or whatever. And so let's say it's a pH of 8.9, and you go on about your business and turn everything in, and the project manager may not see that information for a week or two, and he's like, what's the deal? We got a pH is normally low, and you can't really recreate that process at that point. Well, now this system will tell you, you've got a pH 8.9. Historically, the averages have been 6.2. You might have an issue in the field. We can go through, procedurally do what we do is verifying the pH and all that. And if there is an issue, we can call the project manager right then and tell him right then and there, we might have an issue here at this well or surface water site. Also, the project manager, since this is internet-based, he can get on and see what we're doing as we're doing it, which is not a benefit to us, but it's a benefit to the program. I don't particularly like it. Okay. Okay, so we talked about a lot of the benefits, but just a couple I want to hit on that I haven't really have yet is the real-time monitoring. This access to weather radar, pretty interesting. This has actually already happened. We had a guy on Chestnut Ridge sampling a well, and he noticed that it looked like storm might be moving in, and he got on the internet right then and there, pulled it all up, saw that the storm was massive. He was able to wrap up what he needed to do and get out of there. So there's safety features. There's a lot of small benefits, and we haven't even realized a lot of them yet. And one thing I really hadn't talked about is the mapping. The mapping is Lynn talked about it a little bit, but our old maps were just paper maps, and for inspections, you might just have an outline of that site. If you didn't know where that site was at, you may have a hard time finding unless you went with somebody who did. Now the mapping is like Google Earth. You can zoom in, zoom out. It has all kinds of layers. We had Liz Burton and Mark Greer go out and they GPS'd everything on these sites, so they're accurate. And they gave us a map key, and you can, like a red circle is a sign. You can go in and you can click on that red circle, and it tells you exactly what that sign should say. Word for word, verbatim, what it should say. So any little issues you had before you weren't sure of now, the mapping takes care of a lot of that. And one last thing is offline capability. Like I said before, a lot of people were doing paper backup because they weren't confident in the system. With offline capability, if you do lose your connection, you can go offline. You can do all your field forms, your logbooking, whatever you need to do, come back to the office and upload it back to the system. So it really takes care of a lot of the paperwork backup need. So future going electric, that's kind of what I had before, was all these books, and you kind of see that map there, kind of what it was, and now, so all that is captured now in the laptop in the field. And so we're meeting the pollution prevention goals with paperless processes, and we're meeting that executive order, which I don't even know what that number stands for, but somebody here can tell you. So if you have any questions for any of us, no?
Roger.
I think it's admirable that you picked up something from the Navy that they've already been implemented and everything, so it makes your job a lot easier. Have you looked at what other DOE sites are doing in terms of the, such as Hanford, Savannah River, wherever, in terms of how they're implementing an automated system there?
That's probably a question more for Lynn or Jason. I'm not sure on that.
We actually, before we went with the Majara system, which is what the system Dave referred to, we did do a canvas to see what other people were using. And upon the conclusion, we pretty much decided that the Department of Defense site that they had used for the BRAC closures was probably the best suited for us. Because if you think about it, the BRAC closure started back in the mid, what is it, 90s, I think? And so they were actually a lot more developed. And they were loading, oh my goodness, they have full sites in this thing. And they're implementing it, they're using it, and it's working.
Thank you.
Follow up, Bob? You have a follow-up question?
No. Okay. No, thank you.
Greg?
I don't know who I'm addressing this to, so I'll start with you because you're an inspector. Great system, but you're still dependent on the integrity of your inspectors, is that correct?
Yes.
So he's not off in a bar just typing in his computer going, oh yeah, I was there, and I remember it was a 7.3, yeah, that's good. I mean, the human element is still very much a part of it.
Yes, it is, and it needs to be, because we need a job as inspectors.
Are there any checks and balances on the human element that verifies that you in fact were where you said you were, not sitting at a gin mill typing on a computer?
It does timestamp when you did the inspection.
That's right.
It does timestamp when you did the inspection. Okay. So it gives you a little proof that, you know, you can't be seen somewhere else and you've got a time here that you're supposed to be inspecting. So it does do that.
Hey, David, there's another element of that too. Just want to make sure everyone realizes, make sure everyone realizes that all the inspectors have to be trained by rigorous standards. And so they go through rigorous training every year. And you have to have I can't think of the word they call it, what is it, an admin key to get into the system. You have to meet the training requirements to be able to receive the admin key to be able to access the system to be an inspector. So that's covered as well. So we don't just have, you know, any sampler out doing inspections.
Okay, David?
It's a pretty admirable system. I saw a presentation on this a couple of months ago that Lynn did to a committee. One of the things I wonder is, what kind of delay? Is this actual real time within minutes, hours of
as far as I understand,
monitoring?
It's completely real time, yeah.
Okay, what about the monitoring of water flow and stuff like that? That has to be manually done, or are there devices that will monitor the water flow, gallons per minute or something like that, out of a outfall?
There are devices we have in the field that are monitoring gallons per minute, yes.
And that's also can be added in real time on this, or no?
Yeah, you can enter the data while the samplers are there. While the samplers are at an outfall or at a well, of course they're using instrumentation to help us do the sampling. But that also let's say for field parameters, it can be tied into the laptop and automatically will give a readout. So let's say our stabilization criteria for a well, we have, of course, 5 of them. And as you reach that, in the datativity section, it's red until you reach the stabilization criteria. It automatically turns to green, so the sampler then knows, hey, it's okay, I've got this parameter in. Once they're all in, it's just like a little bell goes off. Hey, you can sample. So it can be done. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Of course, datativity is just now on the beginning edge of things. But the flow monitors, the flow meters and things that are used in the field, that data is automatically entered into the spreadsheet, the surface water form, which then is real time. Our technical managers, like David said, can go in and can see that purge rates, they can see sampling rates, they can see all kinds of things real time. Which, like David said, we're not used to that just yet, but we'll get there.
No, not at all.
Ms. Cook?
What portions of the data activity are not functioning right now? It's my understanding that...
It's just in the planning phase. We were just talking to Majera about the possibility of running the datativity. We have not implemented any of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ms. Cook, if I could add to that, datativity it's an enormous tool. It's a strong tool. It has the capabilities of performing really what we're using with PIMS and ORS now. It's a total integrated, like the slide said, it's an electronic data collection system. You can archive with it. You can do all kinds of things with it. Currently, what we are going to use datativity for is the electronic notebook, field logbook capabilities, the sampling forms, and those type things. Because one, as everyone in this room knows, DOE already has a system that manages its data. So it is a very powerful tool, and as we ease into that, we'll be able to open up more doors and use it to our benefit.
David?
Great. When do you think that it will be functioning?
Well, that's going to depend on Connie.
You knew it was going to go to you, didn't you? You could just...
So, this is a new wave for us. And in kind of some ways, we've been in kind of not the state of the art for years and been doing things kind of the old-fashioned way. And, electronic records management is something new. We've got to tweak our QA plans. We've got to do a lot of things to get to that point. But it is the way of the future, and we feel like it's the right thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. The amount of human error that it eliminates being electronic and all the trees it saves and everything else, it is the right thing to do. So, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to add that on the private side of Superfund and EPA's requirements to have electronic data, I'm glad to see Oak Ridge moving in that direction. So Lynn will be coordinating with the private side of Superfund in Atlanta to see what some of the parameters are and trying to get that set up. But our system, EPA system, cannot house the extensive data that Oak Ridge has. So on the private side, there is a separate standalone system that can collect, correlate, and be able to interpret the data that they are trying to provide us.
David?
You also mentioned in this, I'm not sure if it'll go back to Lynn or whatever, that the private citizen can also access this information and in real time. Some of the other sites I've looked at where they're monitoring whatnot, they're running 60, 90, 120 days delay, and we're looking at something that can give information to the public in a matter of, 24 hours?
We're actually in a beta testing phase on that yet, so we're actually in a beta testing phase on that, so we're developing that portion, and so we are looking for recommendations and things that you would like to see in that phase of it.
Well, good job. Kudos to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could someone take a moment and explain the facility manager's job and who they are here on the reservation?
Good question.
Yeah, I'll take that one since Lynn has so graciously assigned me to those duties.
He's actually a facility manager for us.
Well, not yet, but I'm almost
Not yet,
there.
almost.
Well, anyhow, you know, Bechtel Jacobs started this trend in that they needed to have one person, one point of contact and a backup at every facility. And they don't just mean a building as a facility. It could be a boneyard, it could be, a treatment system, it could be anything. One person that would know all the activities that go on in that facility. Because when you have multiple subcontractors coming in and doing different jobs, there are hazards, of course, with each one of those jobs. And that facilities manager's primary role is to coordinate all work activities that go on his site, his or her site, in order to protect the workers from different entities that are doing the work.
One more question here. Who at DOE is responsible for auditing the land use manager?
For auditing it?
Yeah, to make sure that it's properly working and it's being administered right. Is that you?
People looking at me.
All right.
As you've heard, it's in the beta testing phase.
Yes.
It's not being implemented.
Now, we did go through IT, and they approved the system, use of the system.
Right, but I think David's talking about periodic audits of it.
Yeah, who's responsible to make sure it's working?
I think that's something we need to think about. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, that we do have certain auditors, both TDEC and EPA, that come out on the site and look at the facility inspection reports, which are housed at, I'm sorry. I didn't know if everybody heard me or not, but we have annual audits, and also they have drop-in audits to where they go in and look at what has been done in the past, the hard copy records. They inspect those and make sure that, the system has been operating the way it is now. I assume, and I don't know for sure, those same auditors will then go to land use manager, and the land use manager can print any report that is required. It also has the archiving capabilities. So I would assume that instead of going to a records data room, we'll go to land use manager and they'll be able to provide the information that they're asking there.
The other thing too that, as far as auditing too, and that is that as part of a manager of the program, we will be continually doing management assessments of the systems. And usually what we do is we'll pick, for example, in field sampling, I'll go and we'll do a assessment of how they are performing to a specific sampling procedure. We would actually go and do an assessment of a component of the land use manager system. So I think there'll be various checks, and also before we actually purchased the system, we actually went through our IT department, and there was a delay, and they had to go through whatever the IT people do to make sure that it was secure. There's firewalls. I know that Liz, in dealing with Majara, that we have had some firewall issues where we've actually had to get their people in with our people to make sure that some of those details were worked out. It's a good question.
Okay, just 1 second before you come in. Let me ask EPA and TDEC, are y'all in conference with these folks on this? Are you looking at how you're going to be able to use this land use manager and how you're going to audit it for accuracy? Or
The short answer is yes. The biggest issue for TDEC is who is ultimately responsible for the institutional controls. And if it's the facility manager, then we will be looking for the circular record of decision to specify that.
Okay. Ms. Jones?
This is a question that I haven't had to ponder, but I think that this is a new approach that we will all have to consider, and I think we'll agree with John that our documents, since we are improving on the way we're doing work, that our documents would have to specify how this would be used and who would be the ultimate responsible party for it. As we've learned over time, how land use controls and institutional controls would be identified, we're learning how we should be monitoring that too. So this is still a work in progress.
Well, I just hope that, that our TDEC and EPA are in the loop in these early stages, at least know what's going on. David, thank you for
Just
waiting.
to chat a little bit, because I don't want to belabor a point, but one thing we do have a lot of within DOE is checkers, people checking other people's work. The way we structure projects, though, is that basically we'll take a piece of work, build it into a project. In this case, it would be the project that Jason manages. And the project manager has responsibility, ultimately, essentially the captain of the ship, to make sure that the project is implemented properly, as close to on time and as close to within budget as possible. But the project manager has access to other personnel and can bring people in as they see fit to ensure the quality of what they're doing. We do have in DOE, we're actually reorganizing right now, but as of a couple days ago, we had an organization called the Performance Assurance Division. That is what those guys do. They check up on they assure quality performance on projects. We also have the support office. We have a large group of people in the federal building who are responsible for doing work like this. Then ultimately we have the regulators, TDEC and EPA, to assure that what we do well. We know that assuring proper implementation of stewardship commitments is a critical element of our cleanup program. I mean, if there's one message from this presentation, and that you guys can see, I'm sure, on the Oak Ridge Reservation, we try to clean up things by actually removing contamination, and where that is practicable from a cost and engineering standpoint, that's what we do. And we also left with some burial grounds and some other areas where it's not possible to remove all the contamination, simply because the cost of doing that would be so high. We know that for our approach to those situations where we cap things in place or we leave sediments underneath a river, stewardship is the thing that has to work. So we will be investing a lot of energy into making sure that these systems work properly.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and open this up to the public here. Ms. Garacki.
Thank you. I'm Susan Gowerecki. I had a couple of related questions. How do you prevent unauthorized changes to the information once it's been entered into the system?
There is the system itself has controls where only certain people can go in and perform certain functions. And that assures that you are only allowing those people to go into where they can be and authorize changes to that component of it. I don't know if that answers your question, or?
Well, I mean, that's true of many
Right.
systems out there, but they're still able to be hacked. I mean, I guess how do you ensure an appropriate level of security?
It's gone through our IT department. It's checked. It has the firewalls, and we do maintain it, and we look at it continually. I don't know if you want to, Liz, is there anything that you can add as far as the integrity of the system when you were working with Majara?
It should be as secure as the Navy system is.
Okay.
It's the same programmer, but it's all behind our firewalls. So as secure as all of ORR is, it should be as secure.
The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.